Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller with you. And we got a smooth opening. How about that? Now, one of the things about Access to Democracy is that every once in a while we have a crisis and a guest doesn't show up. And then we run around like chickens without heads. And so I ran out to the front of the building and I found this fellow out there with a tin cup saying, "I'm retired now. Please help me." And who was it other than Steve Francisco, who is not only a former guest host, but a good friend. And we pulled Steve in and got him to the point where he's saying, well, maybe I'll come back and get involved in the program. So Steve Francisco, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. You said, when I spoke to you earlier this morning, you said you had a surprise for me today. I didn't know the surprise was that I was going to be the pinch-hitting guest.
Neither did I at that point.
That's right.
But as long as you're here, it's a pleasure. And it's really great to be brought up to date because you disappeared from the show about 6 years ago.
That's right.
And tell us why and what happened since then.
Yeah, I've had an interesting career path. I worked in government, worked in Washington, D.C. as congressional staffer for many years, and then lobbied on Capitol
To one of
Hill.
our congressmen.
Yeah, Bruce Vento, who
Yes.
formerly represented St. Paul. He was Betty McCollum's predecessor.
Who unfortunately died of cancer.
That's right, yeah. But I worked for him many years. I lobbied on the Hill for the United Steelworkers on labor law issues and health care and pensions. Then I got married, came back to Minnesota, worked in the nonprofits for the Council of Nonprofits many years. You interviewed me as when I was federal policy director for MCN.
Right.
And it was through that association you and I really got to know each other. And then I went to work for Sun Country Airlines. And people may think, well, why would you go from all that into the airline business? I became a flight attendant and a trainer training new flight attendants for Sun Country, and I did that for 6.5 years. The other part of my interests, other than law and government and politics, is aviation, and I've always loved aviation, so that's what drew me to Sun Country. I had a good run, but because of the pandemic and some health issues, I had to step away. So.
Well, we're glad to see you back and have you back.
Thank you.
Hopefully in a much bigger role. That really makes our day.
Thank you.
And other than that, we are in a world of chaos. We are in a world of now Omicron variant. We have gone through getting vaccinated and getting revaccinated, and where are we going with the chaos here? And we can talk about the fact that we have one party that's trying very hard to do things and one party that's just saying no to everything, being obstructionist. Where are we?
We're in a very difficult situation, and it's hard to envision the path back to normalcy, if you want to call it that, until we get to a point where we stop viewing vaccinations as a political act and viewing it as a necessary act to protect ourselves, to protect the people we work with, and to protect our families. And until we get to that, I'm afraid we're going to see that there's fertile ground out there for new variants to develop, and we're going to keep, it sort of reminds me, I said to someone the other day, the movie Groundhog Day, where you wake up every day and it's the same thing over and over. So I think we're stuck in a rut until we can progress beyond that.
Now, interestingly enough, we have this movement of don't infringe on my rights, don't stick a needle in my arm. However, the same people are saying, oh, it doesn't infringe anybody's rights if you have no control of your womb. How do you reconcile the hypocrisy of the abortion movement, and we can even throw in the gun movement in there,
right,
and where we are with vaccinations?
Well, let's just focus on vaccinations for just a second, if we could, because I do understand that when the vaccines came out, there were legitimate questions, I think, by people who were concerned about the efficacy of the vaccine, the safety of the vaccines. Remember, these vaccinations were developed in the space of less than a year. That was incredible. But, you know, the New York Times and other media did big exposés on how the vaccines were developed and all of the new technology that went into developing them.
And aren't we lucky that that technology exists today?
Exactly
that
right.
We don't have really the
Right.
downside of 1918
Right.
and that epidemic or
Right.
that pandemic.
But I think once the questions were answered about the safety of it, sure, there were always going to be a small number of people who had adverse reactions, but a vaccine that is 90% effective or 90% or more effective in preventing serious illness, hospitalization, and death, once you know that, you have to act on that. And I think it's been a real disservice that we have had so-called health professionals and politicians who are not health professionals,
Particularly the politicians.
making judgments about these things and spreading disinformation.
And really, the disinformation that they spread, and you see the stories all the time about, oh, I wish I had my husband back.
Right.
We didn't want to get vaccinated. Now my whole family is vaccinated, but he's gone, and he's gone forever.
And sadly, Alan, I'm afraid all of us know some people. I personally have a family member. My sister lost her mother-in-law to this pandemic, and she was not vaccinated.
I mean, initially, we had to wait for the vaccine to be perfected. The vaccine is perfected. Now we move on to the fact, you've got to get it. You've got to get it for your children.
That's right.
You've got to get it for other people so that you don't become a carrier and spread it to other people. And, you know, 80% or more of the people who are in the hospitals now are the unvaccinated.
That's right.
And that's a disservice to the rest of society.
My wife, Bonnie, works in healthcare on the administrative side. She's not a provider, but she's on the administrative side. And she's been coming home every day giving me the statistics on how many people in Abbott Northwestern Hospital are in for coronavirus and the percentage of people that are not vaccinated. And the people who are hospitalized and having the most adverse reaction and risk of death, as you said, they are unvaccinated. So the only way we're going to get out of this is when people start listening to authentic, reliable information and not listening to politicians with an agenda or people who are not scientists or healthcare professionals.
Or even pseudoscientists.
Right.
And healthcare professionals who see their day in the sun for a little bit of fame and will say anything.
This is more insidious, in my opinion. Because I was saying to my wife the other day, I said, you know, if you were a lawyer and you deliberately misled a client about the law, the Bar Association could reprimand you, and in the worst case, you could be disbarred. I don't understand why so-called healthcare professionals who spread disinformation cannot be subject to sanctions as well.
Well, they could be if they were brought up.
Yeah, and they should. That's my point, though, that I think they should be.
In Michigan, the lawyers who spread the disinformation about the election have just been fined $172,000.
That's right.
And in addition to that, they've been referred to the Bar Association for
Right.
disciplinary action. There's an interim action in New York against Rudy Giuliani, and he has been stopped from practicing law even while the proceedings go forward, simply because what he was saying was so dangerous. And there are others.
That's a remarkable development with Mr. Giuliani when you consider he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He was one of the top Justice Department prosecutors in the 1980s. And to have fallen from that,
and he was the city's
to having
mayor,
your law license suspended, that's an incredible thing.
And obviously, someplace along the line, he fell off the edge.
Yeah.
And I would like to get inside his head and see what's there or what damage has been done along the way, because it's really pathetic. Now, I mean, we know that Bill Gates is putting all kinds of antibodies into the vaccine that are getting into our body. And I figure anything that Bill Gates can put into my body has got to be a plus.
Some of these claims, you know, microchips being implanted in you so the government can track where you are. You don't want to be tracked? Turn off your locator on your cell phone. You know, I mean, there are all these crazy things that are out there that unfortunately seem to have a receptive audience.
Disinformation has really, really flourished with the uptick we have in communication these days.
Right. And the biggest danger, I think, in disinformation, and you sort of alluded to it a few moments ago, is when we look at how fragile our democracy is and the kind of lies and disinformation that are spread, that when enough people believe them are actually a threat to our democracy. Right now I'm reading Bob Woodward's book, Peril, which it's frightening to read that book because—
I did read it, yes.
Yeah, it's frightening because the situation with respect to January 6th was actually worse than what we knew and was more dangerous.
January 6th is a perfect example of how people, uninformed, people don't read newspapers anymore, people rely on what they hear through social media, and how can you believe any of that? Are then led into, I mean, I look upon it as everybody who was associated with the former president, who shall remain nameless, everybody becomes tainted by him and his misogynistic lying. I can't believe that people are following him. I can't believe that we're still going through this.
But
now,
I've given a lot of thought to what's happened in our politics, and I think that there is a lot of anger out there. There's no question about that. And, you know, just so this isn't just totally a partisan thing, Democrats have let people down plenty of times too.
Absolutely.
And I think that feeds into this, and people are not sure what to believe. But if you're inclined to believe what is presented on Fox News, what I call the faux news or the false news, you're going to have a worldview that is shaped by that and that influences how you digest information about what government is doing and what politicians are doing. And unfortunately, you know, and the same could be said on the other side, that if your inclination is more toward the liberal side, you may be inclined to believe most of what you hear on CNN. But being a really good citizen in a democracy, it requires you to think critically. It requires you to search out other information to test whether what you believe is true.
Not be too lazy to get to the truth.
That's right.
Not to be too lazy to get the information that's really essential for you and your family.
I always say, don't let other people do your thinking for you. You have to do your own thinking to be a good citizen, I think, in a democracy.
That's a good line.
Yeah.
So we talked about that, and we talked about now the needle. Explain to me the hypocrisy of the abortion where people think that a woman does not have the right to manage her own body, her future, and...
Well, as you and I speak today on today's December 3rd, yesterday the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case testing a Mississippi law that basically bans all abortions after 15 weeks and basically would gut the provisions in Roe versus Wade, which has been American law for almost 50 years, almost half a century.
1973.
And what was really alarming, I listened to part of the oral arguments yesterday, and Justice Roberts and a few others, they sort of betrayed how little they actually know about pregnancy. That in many cases, a lot of women don't necessarily know that they're even pregnant.
Especially young women.
That's right.
Especially women who are the victims of rape or abuse,
Right.
incest.
But I think concerning too is the idea that you have in many of these state legislatures, such as Texas and Georgia and other places where they're enacting these restrictions that really fly in the face of 50 years of American law. That's really a problem. But the fact that this court wouldn't even stand up earlier this year on the Texas law and say, you can't do this, it's unconstitutional. How is there going to be respect for the decisions of courts if people come to believe that decisions from our highest court are really political decisions and not based on respect for precedent and the rule of law?
And I was looking at some of the hearings before Congress of some of these recent, and even Judge Roberts, justices of the Supreme Court, all of whom told the Congress, the Senate, that they would adhere to precedent, and certainly the most recent three, that they would not overturn Roe versus Wade. Versus Wade. And it's clearly, it was lying. Clearly it was misinformation to get them on the Supreme Court.
Well, one of the newer justices, a Trump appointee, by the way, President Trump got 3 appointments onto the U.S. Supreme Court in the space of 4 years with the help of then Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. But Kavanaugh yesterday seemed to be working with this idea that we don't need to directly say we're overturning Roe versus Wade. He seemed to be leaning in the direction of upholding the Mississippi statute and saying this is really an issue for state legislatures to decide whether or not women have a right to make decisions about their own bodies. And remember, this Mississippi law, there's no exception in it for cases of rape or incest where a woman becomes pregnant.
Or where a woman finds out that she's carrying a child that has substantial physical or mental problems.
Exactly,
and,
yeah.
You know, that will be, come back in later years to actually cost a fortune.
Right.
And to be possibly an unwanted child.
Right.
And Amy Coney Barrett, for instance, said what I thought was the most offensive of anything. When she talked about safe houses, she said, well, these women can go to term and then put the child up for adoption into a safe house. Well, number one, we have several 100,000 children in homes and centers who are not adopted and being cared for by society. But what you're saying, Justice Barrett, is that they should have to carry to term for 9 months an unwanted child from an unwanted pregnancy, worse even if it's rape or incest, and then put it up in a safe house. This is making the woman a vessel carry a child, and that's just not the way I see society.
There are a lot of assumptions behind some of the positions of members of the court about things that may or may not play out, and you're pointing to one of them about adoption. But just the very basic principle, if liberty means anything, it has to mean you have control of your body. And this puts a burden onto women. Let's remember something else about the abortion issue. Let's think back to before Roe versus Wade, when abortion was illegal in pretty much all 50 states. What happened when women still got abortions, but they were back alley abortions where women died from
lot of them-
unsafe
a
and
lot of them
unhealthy
died,
procedures.
right.
But let's remember this too. Wealthier women were able to get abortions so-called under the table or behind closed doors. That's what we may go back to. We'll get a ruling from the Supreme Court, I think, by next June, and we're going to find out where they are. But the discussion and oral argument yesterday was, I think, very concerning about the future of Roe versus Wade as American law.
And moving on from that, let's talk about guns. We had another gun incident this week of a 15-year-old who was just handed a Sig Sauer semi-automatic pistol last Friday, a week from today, and 3 days ago walked into his high school and killed 4 students outright and wounded 8 others, including a teacher, with apparently the blessings of his parents.
We've just learned today, in fact, as I was coming over to the studio today, listening to the prosecutor in Michigan, she is now charging the parents with felony. They're being charged with unintentional manslaughter for having provided the gun to him, and knowing that he had expressed concern about misusing the gun and committing this horrible crime, did nothing about it. That's a very unusual thing. It doesn't happen too often in these school shootings where a prosecutor has gone against the parents and saying, wait a minute, you were responsible here too, as well as the person who actually pulled the trigger, because you provided the gun, you knew he had mental health issues and had expressed this in the school even before the shooting, and they did nothing about it.
Online and in his diary.
That's right.
And several other places. Plus, they had just been to school the morning of the shooting.
That's right.
Because he was being brought up as being disruptive.
Right.
And he had been brought to the principal's office the afternoon before.
And was still allowed to go back into that classroom the next day. I mean, I think there are issues here about the school's decisions in this all around, just a horrible, horrible tragedy. But you know, it's a terrible thing, Alan. I think we've become desensitized in this country. It's like every other day we hear about a mass shooting in a school or in a public place.
There have been 28 of them this year.
Yeah. And yet we have a
mass
Congress.
shooting means more than 3 people, I believe, being killed by one shooter.
And we have a Congress that refuses to do even the most basic safeguards for public safety on background checks. And you know, they always want to say, well, it was a mental health issue, but what are we doing to address that too?
The gun show loophole.
The gun show loophole, exactly.
At least register your weapons.
And
I'm not against people having weapons.
No, I've hunted. I've been hunting at my property that my parents owned in northern Minnesota. There's nothing wrong with guns as long as they're in the hands of people who are legally entitled to use them and don't have criminal intent.
Use them responsibly.
That's right. But where you know that somebody has a history of abuse or threats or mental illness, these are not people that should be allowed to carry guns. So,
we've wound you up, and this is wonderful. And where are we going to go from here?
Well, we'll see. You mean in terms of...
in terms of access to democracy.
Oh, well...
And Steve Francisco.
Well, I look forward to doing more interviews on the show as I did before. I really enjoyed the experience 6 years ago doing interviews with our guests, and it's a lot of fun, and I think it's a good thing for our community that they get to meet a lot of different people who are doing interesting work and interesting things in our community. So I look forward to doing those interviews again.
And fortunately, longevity has been on our side, and we have been able to interview just about everybody and anybody, you know, up to 2,300 now.
Yeah, and that's really remarkable. What a track
record. Of course,
record.
we reach out to 35 cities, and of course, we're on our own website, and we're also on YouTube. It never ceases to amaze me when I get an email from somebody, say, in Germany, as I did recently, talking about having seen the show on email and or when a lady, years past, when Representative Klein was in here, having a elderly lady come up to me. I can't say elderly anymore at my stage, but and say, I don't like the questions that you ask Congressman Klein. And I said, well, thank you for watching.
That's right. That's right.
You don't know who's watching, but I like to think that we've been able to provide a really important service for the community and for our viewers and for now all the people in our network of 35 cities.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. We live in such a great community, and there are so many people doing interesting work here that make Eagan and the surrounding area of the South Metro a great place to live. Yeah.
And fortunately, we've had Mary Dahlke with us for about 15, 16 years to enable us to do this. I don't know what we would have done without her. And we now have some new additions. We've lost most of our crew to longevity and senility, perhaps, which is what I'm ready to
I don't know
pack
about
it
Alan.
in for. But
on a bad day, Alan, I think you're still more with it than 95% of us.
Well, that doesn't say much for 95% of us, that's all. No, and gerrymandering. We have 2 minutes, and I know it drives Mary crazy when I bring up a topic with 2 minutes to go that could take a whole discussion.
Could do a whole show on. Yeah.
Are we going to be damaged in Minnesota by gerrymandering, or?
Yeah, I don't think so in Minnesota for the fact that our legislature is currently split. But I want to say something just generally about gerrymandering. It goes on both sides, both in Democratic-led legislatures and in Republican ones. The Republican-led legislatures have made more news recently simply because some of this in some of the southern states has been really outrageous and borderline legal, or some would say blatantly illegal in terms of gerrymandering based on race and other issues. But I think a lot of states are looking at this issue and saying, you know, instead of legislatures doing it, we ought to have maybe a bipartisan commission model where you have a mix of people.
I've said that for years.
Yeah, I think that I don't know that would reduce the number of legal challenges on gerrymandering, but maybe it would be more acceptable than when it's such a blatantly political exercise if you have it done by legislatures. So I just raised that for folks to think about.
Whenever the people in the control room raise one figure, I get nervous as to whether it's an opinion or whether it is something to do with maybe 1 minute left of the interview. We've been talking to Steve Francisco. Steve has returned from the hinterlands.
From the sky.
From many adventures.
Yep.
And is going to rejoin us. And we're so pleased to have you back in that capacity.
Thank you, Alan.
That you have the time to spend with us, and really look forward to Access to Democracy with Steve Francisco.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And thank all of you for watching as usual, and we'll see you soon. That's a little too loud.
Now that's really loud.